This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Dennis McKinney, Kansas Director for the USDA Farm Service Agency, to discuss a new program for specialty crop producers, as well as a waiver for winter grazing CRP. K-State Small Ruminant Specialist Kelsey Bentley continues the show as she explains what sheep and goat producers should have on hand and be prepared for when it comes to lambing and kidding. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White and Phillip Lancaster in today's show with part of their Cattle Chat podcast, where the pair conversed about a producer wanting to finish out his own steers. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with a Farm Service Agency update with Kansas Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency, Dennis McKinney. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dennis, first wanting to mention a new program that has recently been announced, the Marketing Assistance for Specialty Crop Producers.
This program was just announced, provides assistance for specialty crop producers to overcome those barriers to entry in the field, and help them get started, get rolling, to get till there's enough economies of scale that those programs, those entry barriers can be overcome. Over the years, we've helped specialty crop producers across the nation develop because we've proven that we can overproduce traditional feed grains and wheat and food grains. And so we've tried to help agriculture across the United States diversify and get other sources of income and capture those specialty crop markets locally if we can. Makes for stronger farms locally. It also, we found, helps build resilience in our food system. So when there's something like a pandemic or other major events, we have local producers producing for us to fill in the gaps. The other thing we found, both with programs like this for specialty crop producers and our urban ag programs, we're finding other benefits as well. We're finding that we're developing in and around cities and urban areas. They're cleaning up a lot of places that were blighted. They're helping neighborhoods get reinvestment in those neighborhoods and reduce crime levels and get more families living there. But basically, I think the biggest benefit I see out of this, where we're helping with specialty crops and with urban ag, it's like a small business development center. You know, the state and federal government put a lot of money in developing small businesses because we know that the economic returns on that are tremendous. And that's what we're seeing here. We're working with groups like Cultivate KC and others who help provide education, training, and business modeling for a lot of these producers. And when they get started, they typically become very successful small business producers. So I see it as our own USDA small business incubator model because we're helping a lot of people get up and running in their own businesses. So I like the direction we're taking on these programs.
So what are some examples of specialty crops?
We've got floriculture, nursery crops, fruits, vegetables. You know, there's a variety of different crops out there. We're seeing that particularly developed in some of these small farms in the urban areas, but there's also larger producers in rural areas who are investing in these. And so they can use these grants for the technology or the equipment they need to get those perishable crops protected into the market sooner and to overcome higher packaging costs, things like that. Just whatever it takes to get into that market and overcome those barriers to entry. Once those markets grow larger, it's easier to enter and get the market going.
And wanting to mention some other things that are happening at the Farm Service Agency, an upcoming deadline.
Right. Acreage reporting deadline for your fall seeded crops is December 16th. Even if you're not finished, go ahead and report what you've got. So you don't have to do I don't have all the problems with late reporting then later on. And while you're there, please go ahead and report your grass, your alfalfa, everything else that's already in the field and is growing, as well as rye and triticale and all those things. Go ahead and get that done. The ladies at our offices are very dedicated to customer service. A lot of them tell me they love when the producers come in for reporting because that's when they get to catch up with them on their families and what's going on in the community. But it's an important deadline, so please work with all of our frontline employees to help get that done so they don't have to try to cram a whole bunch of work into the last 5 minutes.
Another thing with the Farm Service Agency, a waiver with CRP?
Correct. This year, and it's just good for this year only, we have a waiver to allow us, we can approve winter grazing of CRP acres. A lot of us had assumed that winter grazing was already approved because we know those of us who have livestock and who grow grass that sometimes winter grazing is the best time to make some improvements in that grass. You alternate those grazing periods and you can really make some good improvement. Apparently this rule was adopted in 2020 that banned winter grazing of CRP between November 1 and March 1. We did apply for and were approved for a 1-year waiver on that, so that if you will go to your office, if you want to graze that in the winter, go to your local FSA office and apply. If it meets the conservation requirements, and they'll send that up to the state office, and I can sign off on that and approve that. Still have to meet all the conservation requirements, have to have a minimum cover left when you're done. Under non-emergency grazing, it's maximum of 120 days grazing in any 1 year. Every other year, under emergency grazing, it's 90 days maximum. The point is that we can work a different grazing period into that those grazing patterns. And with CRP, it's a maximum of every other year if it's not emergency. So we're not abusing it, but we are getting a grazing on there at a different time of the year when we know will improve grass stands, and we believe improves habitat as well. And by the way, if someone has cattle on there, they also have the water turned on, which tends to be very good for upland game as well. We also know that concerns have been voiced about haying of CRP, that can possibly set back wildlife habitat. So if producers know that they have a winter grazing option in their hip pocket in case of emergency, then they're less likely to hay everything they can in a drought year. So we think it presents a good alternative that possibly is good for wildlife and for the grass as well, and the producers. We also have to face the fact that our rental rates on general CRP have become relatively low compared to the market. If we want to keep people enrolling and re-enrolling in CRP, we need things like this to add value to that CRP contract so the producers want to stay in the market, want to keep it enrolled in CRP and keep it in grass.
Dennis, also today, you want to share a few reminders of how the Farm Bill interacts with the Farm Service Agency and NRCS.
Right. Congress is still considering the extension of a farm bill or creation of a new farm bill. So without a farm bill, which is where we're at now, there's a lot of things we cannot do. So if there's something you'd like to do, please check with our offices first. We have 96 of those service centers across the state of Kansas. Check with us so we can find out what you want to do, if we can help you with that at this point in time. NRCS programs, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, are funded from a different pool of money. So their EQIP, CRP, their EQIP and CSP and other programs are still active. So feel free to go in and talk to NRCS. If you're not eligible, we can still help you with eligibility. We can help you establish your eligibility, and then you can qualify for those programs with NRCS. So there's still active conservation programs out there.
There are also some upcoming conferences that maybe young beginning farmers might want to look into.
That's right. You know, the demographic data tells us we need to get new people into farming. The average age of farmers in Kansas across the nation, in fact, keeps going up. We have farm loan programs that will assist beginning farmers, but this is a season when there's a lot of conferences, educational conferences, so keep it on the calendar. Kansas Farm Bureau has one coming up. Other groups like Kansas Farmers Union and others will run educational conferences through the year. A group in Wichita called Common Ground helps with some of the alternative crop education. But a lot of those things out there, so we encourage beginning farmers, keep an eye on that, and then check with us, with our farm loan offices. We want to help you get started.
And another conference that sometimes people from the Farm Service Agency help with, the Women Managing the Farm Conference.
That's correct. That's coming up. There's some pre-conference meetings February 12th in the afternoon. The conference itself will be February 13th and 14th. There's an early bird registration deadline of January 10th. So this is the 21st year of the conference. We encourage you all to take a look at that. There'll be some very good topics on the program for this year.
What is currently happening with the Farm Loan Program?
Well, the Farm Loan Program we're getting a lot of applications right now across Kansas for the FSA Farm Loan Program. In fact, it looks like our applications for direct loans are up about 30% statewide, which is reflective, I'm afraid, of the farm economy. You know, cash flows are pretty tight right now. Crop prices are not that good compared to input costs. And we are starting to hear stories of some lenders cutting back. And therefore, our applications for our loans are up, but we still encourage you to come see us. For a direct loan right now, used to purchase farm real estate, our interest rate is 5.25%. Again, that's, with land prices being at record highs right now, that some of those younger producers probably need to finance at least part of their loan with us to make that affordable. We've got a number of new policies in place to help spread that over a longer period of time, help the younger producer maintain liquidity so that not all of their, 5 or 10 years from now, not all their cash flow is absorbed by debt service. If we have a joint financing loan where we'd provide half, a commercial lender provides half. For our share of that loan, that interest rate would be 3.25%. And then our operating loan funds interest rate right now is 4.75%. And emergency loans for farmers and ranchers that were affected from physical production losses from natural disasters, that interest rate is 3.75%. So feel free to come talk to our offices across the state. We have 21 loan offices. But if you stop to any one of our 96 county offices, they can direct you to the correct loan office.
And Dennis, just wanting to put out this reminder as we wrap up today's conversation of how you've seen FSA support agriculture this past year.
I was, thinking about wheat and reporting rye and triticale. I was thinking back when I was in high school, national debate topic was on world food supply. We'd just had a World Food Conference in Rome, and the consensus was there's no way we could accommodate the growth in the world's population because our food supply would not keep up. Well, we've proven that with investments, with the public-private partnership we have through our land-grant universities, with investments in new technology and research in new technology, and then the capitalist markets that we have with producers who are very tuned in to applying new technology in the best way possible, we've proven that we can still overproduce and have excess supply in the markets to the point where it drives down prices. And I just think it's a real credit. I remember it was not that many years ago that Norman Borlaug at Iowa State crossed that genetic barrier and got wheat crossed with rye to develop triticale. That was a landmark move. And since then, we've proven that we can still produce and keep up. Countries like India have become net food exporters, where they used to have drastic shortages. I think it's a real credit to the farmers and ranchers across Kansas, across the United States, what we do. We've faced serious food shortages in our world. That's why FSA, the Farm Service Agency, particularly since World War II, has had a mission of both conservation and food supply. And that's why you always hear me say we have the privilege of working with the world's best farmers and ranchers on programs that reduce erosion, that improve wildlife habitat, and help our nation have the safest, most abundant food supply in the world. And that is a strategic advantage that's second to none in an unstable world.
Dennis, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
That was Kansas Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency, Dennis McKinney. As always, you can find out more information from the Farm Service Agency at Farmers.gov. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about kidding and lambing with K-State Small Ruminant Extension Specialist, Kelsey Bentley. Kelsey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Kelsey, as we're thinking about kidding and lambing, before we even get to the point of birth, what are things that need to take place before that point?
Yeah, so just very briefly, I would really like to talk about the CD&T vaccine kind of timeline series, because a lot of people don't really think about that before lambing and kidding, but that actually gives us a lot of protection of lamb. So that way when lamb or kid does come out into a dirty environment, they're more likely to have antibody readily from mom, where she's passed that antibody through colostrum. So to get started with that, I think that ewes and does should both be vaccinated for CD&T 4 to 6 weeks before lambing, but we should avoid vaccinating ewes and does within the first 14 days prior to lambing. So if we miss that timeline of the 4 to 6 weeks and it gets to be that 2-week mark, we maybe should not vaccinate and just decide that we're instead now going to focus on making sure that we vaccinate kids and lambs at an earlier time point, so therefore they can form their own immunity. Ewes that haven't been vaccinated for CD&T before will need 2 doses spaced 4 weeks apart. So, for example, if a ewe wasn't vaccinated as a lamb, she should receive 1 dose 10 weeks before lambing and then a booster vaccination 6 weeks before lambing. Lambs should also be vaccinated at around 6 to 8 weeks of age, with a second booster dose given 4 weeks later, between 10 to 12 weeks of age. And it's critical to follow those vaccine instructions very closely. Vaccine failure is often due to mistakes in shot timing or improper storage of the CD&T vaccine.
And Kelsey, as we talk about this, a lot of similarities when it comes to taking care of lambs and goats.
Yes. So for CD&T in particular, we're going to manage does and ewes exactly the same. So that timing, that shot timing, stays exactly the same between the species.
And so when it comes to kidding and lambing, what are some things that maybe producers should have prepared and ready when the time comes?
Yeah, so I think number one, above all, you need to have a relationship with your veterinarian. I think having that veterinary client-patient relationship makes it so much easier for if we do, in fact, need a C-section. Not saying that we ever want to have a C-section, but I find that vets are far more willing to come out late at night and help you if you have an existing client relationship with them. So we shouldn't be calling an unknown vet at 2 o'clock in the morning and expect them to come out. From that, though, talking about like tools that we need to have on hand, I would have clean towels. a hairdryer or heat lamp or some form of, if a lamb or kid does get chilled, we need to be able to heat them in a way that's appropriate. Tubing supplies, once again, going to be critical. I'm not saying that we should go around and tube every single lamb or kid, but for those that are particularly low vigor, do have caught chill or just slow to get going, it might be good to go ahead and tube them with some warm colostrum and kind of give them a little bit of a head start in getting their internal body warmed up, and then therefore we see less shivering and less hypothermia within those lambs and kids. And then finally, also things like OB gloves, lube, all of the things that you would associate with just veterinary care, we need to have on hand, especially around lambing and kidding. We shouldn't be running to the store, to get needles or lube or anything like that. We need to ensure that everything's kind of well prepared for. And I always find that if we prepare for worst case scenario, that's less likely to happen.
What should maybe the barn setup ideally be for safe delivery and staying warm?
So ideally, I would like to see, which this doesn't always happen, that once a ewe or a doe goes into a jug, which would be a small kind of 4x4, some people even do a 5x5 area where she can have kind of bedded down, give her some water and hay or grain or whatnot. Once that ewe goes in to that 4x4 jug, and then we eventually allow her to come out of that 4x4 jug, say approximately 48 to 24 hours after she's had lamb and they've had time to bond. Ideally, another doe or ewe would not go into that same jug. So just from a biosecurity standpoint, I would really like to see jugs be cleaned out in between ewes and does. Now, I know that's not always practical. However, in an ideal world, that would be really nice for us to do. So if we do have the space where each kind of ewe or doe can have her own individual jug, that would be ideal. Or even if we can just at least scrape out bedding and put fresh bedding down for that ewe or doe, I think that makes that critical. And then finally, also setting up a creep space in which lamb or kid has access to creep where mom cannot get into that, and kind of give them an area, set up a little heat lamp in there, things that'll just kind of make them more prone to grow, more prone to be productive throughout their life. I think all in all, if we can do some of those things like setting up jugs, setting up creep space, and then appropriately turning out ewe and doe into that space, I think that we find a lot of success with lambing and kidding.
And hoping for a simple birth, but sometimes that's not the case. And when might someone need to step in and help assist that?
Yeah, so ideally, I would say that there's several things that we kind of look for as to when you need to assist. In an ideal world, does and ewes should be able to have lambs or kids on their own. So I don't want to recommend us stepping in too early, because I do think that happens a lot of times, and then we have some issues with ewe or doe bonding with that lamb or kid. But if we see kind of 30 minutes of unproductive labor, so she's trying to lay down, she's trying to have lamb or kid, and we notice that there's not much progress being made, it may be time to then step in and intervene. We need to make sure that during that time, though, we are kind of leaving her alone. A lot of people don't know that us standing there kind of over them or being kind of meddling within that birth process actually stops some of the oxytocin. So therefore, like if we're hovering over her and she's not being productive, that might be the reason for that. Another thing is if we see water sac and that water sac hasn't ruptured or appears to not be making any sort of progress. And then finally, if you notice immediately a dystocia. So let's say I do go to my night check and I see back leg instead of front leg. It might be okay for me to actually go ahead and intervene, assuming that ewe or doe might actively be experiencing dystocia. Then we can maybe, step in and do some early intervention. However, if things appear to be going according to plan, I think that we should just kind of step back, allow nature to take its course, and then within 30 minutes, if we don't see any progress, then maybe step in.
What are some tips maybe when it comes to having to step in?
Ideally, once again, gloves, always gloves. We are going to be messing with biological fluids. And then also you're going to be taking your hands and putting them inside you or doe. So ensuring that everything's clean. Wash your hands. Take off your rings. We don't want to be causing her to have any sort of infection. So definitely take time to put on gloves. Maybe use lube if necessary. However, normally when we start to get into a certain time past birth, lube really isn't necessary. We should be able to go and then palpate. Before we start pulling anything, we need to orient ourselves. So I think that's the number one kind of trouble that we get into, is that sometimes producers, in an effort to be quick, won't locate head. So before we start pulling on, even if we have 2 feet out, we need to go in and manually palpate and ensure that we can sense where head is, and head should be between front legs. If we start pulling preemptively before we get some orientation, we can actually cause more harm than good. So always make sure that we have gloves, everything's clean, we have towels. But once again, once we get gloves on, we remain calm. We ensure that we orient ourselves, give ourselves plenty of time to know what kid looks like inside that birth canal, and then start pulling.
Once that kid or lamb is on the ground, what are those first steps a producer should take?
Yeah, so I always like to use a fun little mnemonic. So it's going to be clip, dip, sip, and strip. So ideally, if the umbilical cord has more than 2 inches of length on it, we would like to clip that back to be a little bit closer to the body wall, prevent you or doe from stepping on that. And then once we clip that umbilical cord to be shorter to the body wall, we would dip that in some iodine to prevent infection. Another one would be to strip out you to ensure that we get milk plugs out. So a lot of producers don't do that, and then lamb or kid has a really hard time getting milk out or colostrum out, because colostrum is really thick and viscous. So ensuring that we strip out those teats to allow lamb to nurse. And then finally, probably the most important of all of those is the sip portion. So kid or lamb needs to be able to consume approximately 3 to 6 cc's of colostrum before kind of the 12-hour mark. And then ideally, we would even like to see them consume more than that. So it's about 2% of their body weight is what they need to consume within the first 24 hours. So ideally, if we can go ahead and strip out those teats, it makes it somewhat easier for them. And then if those kids aren't nursing, or we think that lamb isn't getting that, then maybe we need to go in and start to tube those individuals.
Kelsey, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
That was K-State Small Ruminant Extension Specialist Kelsey Bentley. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White and Phillip Lancaster.
This was from a listener that has said, this year I want to try to feed out a couple steers at home. So he's going to feed out a couple at home. They're about 850 pounds. And his question was, how long before slaughter should I wait before I get them onto grain, and how much should I increase their intake? So it sounds like a Phillip question, so we'll start with you, Phillip.
So depends on where they're at and what you think their finish weight is going to be. So in this particular question, he's saying they're about 850 pounds. I'm trying to make some guesstimates here, but with typical genetics, home-raised cattle, maybe steer's going to finish around 1,400 pounds or 1,450, somewhere in there.
And when we say finish, they're reaching physiologic maturity. They've got some fat cover on them, and hopefully have reached a point where they're also depositing intramuscular fat.
Yes, where they've deposited an adequate amount of intramuscular fat. So when we say finish, when I use that term, we're generally meaning around half an inch of back fat over the rib. And so that's and you can find some resources to look at, because obviously you can't measure that unless you have an ultrasound machine. And so some resources to visually appraise, and you can roughly estimate that if you get good at it, those steers are going to be a body condition score 8 or 9 when they are at that level of fatness.
So we're going from, in this case, you're ballparking here 1,350. So we've got 500 pounds that they have to gain. What rate of gain would you expect during this period? Because this is going to help with the timing part of the question.
Yep. And so I'm going to estimate it. If we feed them well, we're going to look at 3 to 3.5 pounds of weight per day is kind of what I would expect them to do. And so to be about 5 to 6 months out before your slaughter date.
Okay. And what about the part where we talked about increasing the intake? Do I go from, I know I don't go from no grain to full diet the next day. How long should it take me to kind of ramp them up to get them where they need to be?
Well, so what I generally advise in this situation is probably a little bit slower ramp up than what we would do in a traditional feedlot situation, just because 2 reasons. Probably don't have the level of experience, and so take it through that. But then 2, we're probably feeding grain separate and free choice hay. We don't have the ability to make a totally mixed ration. And so we just want to be a little bit more cautious about causing any acidosis and digestive issues. And so at 850 pounds, I would start them out at probably about 10 pounds of corn per day. And then I would, every couple, 3 days, I would add half a pound or so of corn until I get up to around 20 pounds or so. And then I would hold them there for a little while. And then probably in a month, I might add another half a pound. And then in another month, add another half a pound. And then that's probably where I would hold them. And so that I've pushed them up there pretty good. What I'm really trying to do in my head is target where your diet is about 15% roughage and about 85% of your grain and protein mix.
So as you get them up there and they're gaining, I still want to monitor appetite and manure. If I see any changes in those as we go along the process, I may want to pause a little bit and kind of keep them going straight at that level for a while. I'm also continuing to watch, and you're assuming with the rest of the diet, I've got some hay out there, either free choice or I'm hand feeding hay, so they've got that roughage in their diet. But part of this process is there's no set textbook definition, and I kind of monitor as they go and how long it's going to take. If you have the capability of weighing them, I like your suggestion of I'm targeting a certain weight, but you may want to weigh them along the way. We'll give you some idea. You don't necessarily have to. Or if you've got somebody that's pretty experienced in your area, they may be able to come out and look and say, yeah, we're getting close to finish or not getting close to finish.
Once again, that was the Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White and Phillip Lancaster. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.